Montana Territory, 1883. The last crimson rays of sunset painted the rolling grasslands of Elkhorn Valley as Alexander Lockhart reined in his stallion atop the ridge overlooking his empire. At 25, he owned more cattle than any man for 100 miles, yet the vastness of the land only emphasized the emptiness within him. His Stetson cast a shadow across features too refined for the frontier: high cheekbones, clear blue eyes, and a jawline that had earned him unwanted attention from every unmarried woman in 3 counties. A light stubble covered his chin, the only concession to weeks on the range overseeing the spring roundup. 10,000 head and 30,000 acres don't keep a man warm at night, he muttered, giving voice to the loneliness that had become his constant companion. The frontier had taught Alexander harsh lessons about trust and love. Everyone wanted something from him: his land, his money, his name. The day he'd buried his father 5 years ago, Alexander had buried his heart alongside him, convinced that in the untamed West, attachments were liabilities. A man survived by keeping others at arm's length. Now, an arranged marriage awaited him, a business arrangement with European aristocracy that would cement his status and bring noble blood to the Lockhart ranch. Lady Eleanora Dunsley, daughter of an impoverished English earl, would arrive in 2 weeks' time, bringing her title in exchange for his fortune. The prospect left him hollow, but Alexander had convinced himself that practical matches were the only kind that made sense on the frontier. Romance was a luxury for safer places and softer men. As the sun slipped behind the mountains, he turned his horse toward home, unaware that fate waited for him just beyond the next ridge, ready to challenge everything he believed about love and survival in the wild heart of America. The sound of gunshots shattered the evening calm. 3 sharp cracks echoed across the valley, followed by panicked shouts. Alexander's instincts took over, and he spurred his horse toward the commotion, hand moving to the Colt revolver at his hip. Cresting a small hill, he spotted a stagecoach listing dangerously to one side, its rear wheel shattered. 2 masked men had the driver and a passenger at gunpoint, while a third rifled through luggage. A woman stood apart from the others, her posture defiant despite the danger. "Hand over the strongbox and nobody gets hurt," one of the bandits shouted, gesturing with his gun. Alexander sized up the situation in an instant. 3 against 1 weren't favorable odds, but he couldn't ride away. Drawing his revolver, he fired a warning shot into the air. "That's far enough," he called out, guiding his horse down the slope. "Drop your weapons or the next bullet finds a home." The bandits whirled, caught off guard. The leader raised his gun, but Alexander was faster. His second shot knocked the weapon from the man's hand. "I won't miss next time," Alexander promised, his voice steady as steel. For a tense moment, no one moved. Then, cursing, the outlaws scrambled for their horses and galloped away, unwilling to test the accuracy of his aim. Only when the dust from their retreat settled did Alexander turn his attention to the woman. She stood tall despite the ordeal, her gown of deep blue calico dusty but intact. Golden hair escaped from beneath her bonnet, framing a face that struck him with the force of a physical blow. She couldn't have been more than 22, with eyes the color of summer sage and a determined set to her chin. "You have my gratitude, sir," she said, her voice carrying a slight tremor beneath its composure. "I feared this journey might end before it properly began." Something in her demeanor, the way she held herself with dignity even in crisis, reached past Alexander's carefully constructed walls. He dismounted, removing his hat with an instinctive courtesy his father had drilled into him. "Alexander Lockhart, ma'am. Fortunate I was passing by." He turned to the driver. "How bad's the damage?" The weathered stagecoach driver shook his head. "Wheels shot to hell. We ain't making Willow Creek tonight." "My ranch is less than an hour's ride. You can shelter there until repairs can be arranged." Alexander found himself looking again at the woman, drawn despite his better judgment. "Miss Rose McBride," she replied, extending a gloved hand. "On my way to take a teaching position in Willow Creek." As their hands met, Alexander felt something unexpected, a jolt of recognition, as though he'd been waiting to meet her his entire life. The sensation unsettled him deeply. "A schoolteacher," he said, struggling to maintain his usual reserve. "Brave of you to come all this way alone." A flash of something, pride perhaps or defiance, crossed her features. "The frontier needs education as much as it needs cattle barons, Mr. Lockhart." The gentle rebuke surprised him into a genuine smile, the first in longer than he could remember. Something dangerous stirred in his chest: interest, curiosity about the woman who would journey alone to teach children in a half-built town. Indeed it does, Miss McBride. He helped her retrieve her baggage, notably more books than clothing, and assisted her onto his horse. Indeed it does. As they made their way toward the Lockhart ranch, Alexander found himself uncomfortably aware of Rose's arms around his waist, of the scent of lavender that somehow survived her dusty journey. He reminded himself of Lady Eleanora's imminent arrival and his responsibilities to the Lockhart name. Yet as the lights of the ranch house appeared on the horizon, Alexander couldn't shake the feeling that his carefully ordered world had just tilted on its axis. The Lockhart ranch house stood like a monument to frontier ambition, 2 stories of solid timber and stone where most made do with sod or simple cabins. Lamplight spilled from windows onto a wide veranda, and smoke curled from twin chimneys against the darkening sky. Rose took it all in with quiet assessment. "Your home is quite impressive, Mr. Lockhart." "My father's vision," he replied, helping her down from the horse. "He came west with nothing but determination and built all this." "And now it's yours," she observed. "A heavy inheritance." Something in her tone suggested she understood the weight of legacy better than most. Alexander found himself curious about what brought an educated young woman to the Montana territory alone. His housekeeper, Mrs. Fletcher, appeared at the door, her eyebrows rising at the sight of the stagecoach passengers. "Trouble on the road, Mr. Lockhart." "Bandits," he explained. "We'll need rooms prepared for our guests tonight." While the others were shown to quarters in the east wing, Alexander found himself escorting Rose to the main house. He told himself it was simple courtesy to a lady, but he knew it wasn't entirely true. In the parlor, the firelight caught the gold in her hair as she warmed her hands before the flames. Without her bonnet, he could see the elegant curve of her neck, the intelligence in her eyes as she studied the books lining his shelves. "You have quite a collection," she remarked, running a finger along leather-bound spines. "Thoreau, Emerson, Shakespeare, not what one expects to find on a cattle ranch." "My mother's influence," he admitted. She believed civilization required more than just survival. Rose selected a volume of Emerson's essays. "And what do you believe, Mr. Lockhart?" The directness of her gaze unsettled him. Women in his experience either simpered or schemed. They didn't ask philosophical questions that cut to the heart of a man's character. "I believe in building something that lasts," he answered carefully. "In this country, that means focusing on practicalities." "Is there no room for beauty in your practical world?" She gestured to the piano in the corner, clearly unused for some time. "For music, literature, or teaching children to dream beyond the next harvest?" Her question struck closer to home than she could know. Had he not cast aside his own youthful interests in art and literature after his father's death? Had he not convinced himself that such pursuits were luxuries the frontier couldn't afford? "Beauty doesn't keep wolves from the door, Miss McBride," he said more harshly than intended. Rather than retreat, Rose smiled. "Yet you keep books on your shelves and a piano in your parlor, Mr. Lockhart. Perhaps you need the wolf's absence to recall what the door is protecting." Her insight left him momentarily speechless. Mrs. Fletcher's arrival with refreshments saved him from having to respond. Over tea, he learned that Rose had left Philadelphia following family tragedy, her parents lost to influenza, leaving her to make her own way. "Teaching offered independence," she explained, stirring honey into her tea. "The advertisement for Willow Creek promised room, board, and $30 a month, quite generous for a frontier school." "Willow Creek is growing," Alexander acknowledged. "The railroad spur should reach it by year's end." "Which explains your engagement to Lady Eleanora Dunsley," Rose said, surprising him with her knowledge. "News travels even on stagecoaches. An English aristocrat marrying Montana's wealthiest rancher is quite the topic of conversation." Alexander felt oddly exposed. A mutually beneficial arrangement. Her family needs funds. "My business interests benefit from European connections." "And what of love, Mr. Lockhart?" The question hung between them, simple yet devastating in its directness. "Love is a luxury ill-suited to frontier life," he replied, the words practiced and hollow. "Practical partnerships endure where passion fades." Rose's expression softened. "A philosophy that protects the heart from disappointment, certainly. But at what cost?" Before he could answer, the sound of horses approaching interrupted them. Alexander excused himself, relieved and yet strangely disappointed to end their conversation. Outside, his foreman Jenkins had returned from town with news. Telegraph came through. The English ladies' train arrives next Tuesday in Helena. Her party's bigger than expected. Ladies' maid, valet, some cousin as chaperone. Alexander nodded, his mind still half captured by Rose's question. Make the necessary arrangements. As he turned back to the house, he caught sight of Rose through the window, firelight gilding her profile as she read from the book of essays. Something tightened in his chest, recognition of a kindred spirit, perhaps, or warning of danger to his carefully ordered plans. For the first time in years, Alexander Lockhart felt uncertainty creep into his convictions about what his future should hold. Morning brought a flurry of activity to the Lockhart ranch. The stagecoach driver located a spare wheel in the barn and set about repairs with the help of ranch hands, while the other passengers prepared to continue their journey. Alexander found Rose on the veranda, watching the sunrise paint the distant mountains. She wore the same blue dress, now brushed clean, her hair braided simply down her back. She looked both perfectly at home and utterly out of place in his world. I hope you slept well, he offered, joining her at the railing. Better than expected, she admitted, though I confess I spent half the night exploring your library. I hope you don't mind. He surprised himself by laughing. Books are meant to be read, Miss McBride. Rose, she corrected. After sharing robbery, rescue, and literary discourse, surely we can dispense with formalities. Rose, he repeated, liking the way it felt. Then you must call me Alexander. A comfortable silence settled between them as they watched the ranch come to life, cowhands heading to the bunkhouse for breakfast, smoke rising from the cookhouse chimney, horses being led to water. It's beautiful, Rose said softly, what your father built, what you maintain. It requires constant vigilance, Alexander replied. Nature reclaims what man doesn't defend. Is that why you never leave? You're defending his legacy. The question pierced deeper than she could know. Alexander had not traveled further than Helena in 5 years, tethered to the ranch by duty and the fear that everything would collapse in his absence. Someone must, he said simply. Rose turned to face him fully. And what of your own legacy, Alexander? Is it enough to preserve, or will you build something of your own as well? Before he could answer, the stagecoach driver called out that they were ready to depart. The moment of connection fractured as reality reasserted itself. I should gather my things, Rose said. As she turned to go, Alexander found himself speaking without forethought. The school term doesn't begin for 3 weeks. Staying. The invitation surprised them both. Rose studied his face, searching for his motivation. Why would you want a stranger imposing on your hospitality? Your fiancé arrives soon. Not for 10 days, he countered. And you're hardly a stranger now. Besides, Mrs. Fletcher would appreciate female company, and we have books you haven't discovered yet. The real reasons remained unspoken. That something about her challenged him, made him question certainties he'd lived by for years, that he wasn't ready to sever this unexpected connection. Rose considered the offer, indecision clear in her expression. It would be presumptuous. It would be practical, he insisted, finding safer ground. Willow Creek's boarding house is being renovated. You'd likely end up sleeping in the back room of the general store until your quarters at the schoolhouse are prepared. A smile tugged at her lips. Using practicality as persuasion, you're learning, Alexander. Is that a yes? It's a conditional acceptance, she clarified. I'll stay 1 week, no more, and I'll earn my keep, perhaps cataloging that library of yours or helping Mrs. Fletcher. Relief washed through him, followed by an unsettling awareness that he'd just complicated his life immeasurably. Then it settled. Alexander watched her rejoin the stagecoach briefly to explain her decision to continue to Willow Creek later, noting the curious glances the other passengers exchanged. No doubt his reputation would suffer new embellishments by nightfall. He told himself it didn't matter, that providing hospitality to a stranded schoolteacher was nothing but frontier courtesy. But as Rose returned to the house beside him, he couldn't ignore the lightness in his step or the anticipation coursing through him. For the first time in years, the day ahead promised more than duty and obligation. It promised discovery. The week that followed marked a subtle transformation at the Lockhart Ranch. Rose's presence brought life to rooms long unused, conversations to meals previously eaten in silence. She spent mornings organizing Alexander's neglected library, afternoons exploring the ranch grounds, and evenings engaged in discussions that stretched far into the night. 4 days after her arrival, Alexander found himself leading Rose on horseback to his favorite overlook of the valley. She rode well, another surprise from a city-bred schoolteacher. "My uncle kept horses outside Philadelphia," she explained, noticing his appraisal. "He believed all proper young ladies should ride, though preferably side-saddle." Alexander laughed. "I notice you've abandoned that particular propriety." Along with many others, she acknowledged with a smile, "The frontier demands practicality over convention, doesn't it?" The ease between them still startled Alexander. He found himself sharing thoughts he'd never voiced aloud, his occasional doubts about expansion, his secret enjoyment of poetry, his complicated relationship with his father's memory. Reaching the overlook, they dismounted and stood side by side, taking in the sweep of land that comprised the Lockhart holdings. Cattle dotted the valley floor like scattered chessmen, while the mountains rose blue and distant on the horizon. "I've been thinking about what you asked, about my own legacy," Alexander said after a comfortable silence. "The truth is, I've been so focused on preserving what my father built that I haven't considered what I might build myself." Rose glanced at him, her expression thoughtful. "And now I wonder if there might be more," he admitted, "if duty alone is enough reason for the choices I've made." The wind caught a strand of her golden hair, blowing it across her face. Without thinking, Alexander reached out to tuck it behind her ear. The simple contact sent warmth through his fingers. Rose held his gaze, neither pulling away nor leaning in. "What choices would you make differently?" "If duty weren't the only consideration." The question hung between them, laden with unspoken meaning. Alexander knew they were no longer discussing abstract philosophies, but something immediate and dangerous. "I'm engaged to be married," he said, the words coming out harsher than intended. "Yes," she agreed softly, "to a woman you've never met, for reasons that have nothing to do with companionship or affection." "It's not so unusual. Marriages of convenience built this country." "And did they build happiness as well?" Rose challenged, "or merely endurable lives bound by obligation?" Alexander turned away, unsettled by how easily she dismantled his careful rationalizations. "What would you have me do? Break my word? Insult an aristocratic family? Risk the business arrangements already in motion?" "I would have you consider what you truly want, Alexander," she said gently, "not what is expected or practical or safe." The danger of her words lay in how tempting they were, how they resonated with doubts he'd suppressed for years. Standing beside her, with the land spread out before them and no one to witness his momentary weakness, Alexander allowed himself to imagine a different future, one where companionship wasn't sacrificed for convenience, where the person sharing his life challenged and understood him. "It's too late for such considerations," he said finally, turning back to his horse. "Lady Eleanora arrives in less than a week. The arrangements are made." Rose didn't argue further, but as they rode back to the ranch, the silence between them felt heavy with things unsaid. Alexander found himself counting the days until her departure with a mixture of relief and dread, uncertain which emotion was stronger. That evening, a telegram arrived that changed everything. Alexander read it twice before seeking out Rose in the library, where she sat curled in a window seat with a volume of Wordsworth. "There's been a delay," he announced without preamble. "Lady Eleanora's party encountered difficulties in New York. Their arrival is postponed by 3 weeks." Rose marked her place in the book carefully. "I see, and how do you feel about this news?" Alexander hesitated, examining his reaction. The expected disappointment was absent, replaced by something that felt uncomfortably like reprieve. "Confused," he admitted honestly. "I should be concerned about the arrangements, but instead I feel relieved," she suggested. "Yes," he said, the confession both liberating and frightening. "What does that say about me?" "About the commitment I've made." Rose set aside her book and stood, closing the distance between them. "Perhaps it says you're beginning to question whether practical partnerships are truly enough for a lifetime." Their proximity made it difficult to maintain his usual detachment. Alexander could see flecks of amber in her green eyes, the faint freckles across her nose from days spent outdoors. "This is dangerous territory," he murmured. "Yes," she agreed, "truth often is." Before he could respond, Mrs. Fletcher appeared in the doorway with news that a messenger had arrived from Willow Creek. The schoolhouse was ready earlier than expected, and the town council requested Rose's presence as soon as possible. The interruption broke the tension between them, but Alexander felt the loss of the moment keenly. As Rose went to speak with the messenger, he remained in the library, surrounded by books that suddenly seemed to mock his claim to civilization with their unread wisdom. He had built his life around certainties, that emotional attachments were liabilities, that practical arrangements ensured survival, that duty trumped desire. Now, in the space of a week, a schoolteacher with challenging questions and honest eyes had shaken those certainties to their foundation. And in 6 days she would leave for Willow Creek, while he remained to welcome a bride he'd never met. The morning of Rose's departure dawned clear and cold, autumn asserting itself across the valley. Alexander had offered to drive her to Willow Creek himself, unwilling to entrust her to another stagecoach after the first experience. They set out in his buckboard wagon, Rose's modest possessions and considerable book collection secured in the back. The 20-mile journey would take most of the day, offering one last opportunity for conversation neither was eager to end. "Will you write to me?" Rose asked as the ranch disappeared behind them. "I would like to know how your story unfolds." The simple request carried weight beyond its words. Alexander nodded, unable to imagine severing their connection completely. "And you, will you tell me of your adventures in educating the youth of Willow Creek?" "I suspect teaching multiplication tables and geography lacks the drama of running a cattle empire or marrying European nobility," she teased, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. They fell silent as the wagon followed the rutted trail through rolling grasslands. Alexander found himself memorizing details, the way sunlight caught in her hair, how she absently traced the spine of the book in her lap, the exact shade of her eyes when she looked toward the horizon. "I envy you," he said suddenly. "Me, whatever for. Your certainty, you know exactly what you want from life and pursue it without compromise." Rose's laugh held more sadness than humor. "Is that what you see? I assure you, my path has been shaped by circumstance as much as choice. Yet you chose to come west alone, to teach in a frontier town most educated women would avoid. That takes courage." "Or desperation," she countered quietly. "After my parents died, Philadelphia held too many memories. Teaching was one of the few respectable options for a woman without family or fortune." The vulnerability in her admission touched Alexander deeply. "Then we have more in common than I realized, both following paths partly chosen and partly thrust upon us." "The difference," Rose said gently, "is that you have the power to choose differently. Your wealth and position afford you options most never have." "Options come with obligations," he reminded her, "and what obligation matters more, the one to others or the one to yourself?" Before he could answer, the wagon wheel struck a deep rut, jolting them sharply. The axle made an ominous cracking sound, and Alexander pulled the horses to a stop, grimacing. "That didn't sound promising," Rose observed as he climbed down to inspect the damage. His assessment confirmed his fears. "Cracked clean through, we won't make it to Willow Creek like this." Rose joined him, surveying their situation. The wagon listed heavily to one side, and they were still a good 10 miles from town with no farm or ranch in sight. "Options?" she asked practically. Alexander considered. "There's a line shack about 2 miles north where we keep supplies for the hands. We could stable the horses there overnight, and I could ride to Willow Creek tomorrow for parts." The implications hung between them. Spending the night alone together would set tongues wagging throughout the territory. Rose's reputation as the new schoolteacher would be compromised before she even began. "Unless you'd prefer I leave you here with the wagon while I ride for help," he offered. "Though I don't like the idea of you alone out here." Rose studied the darkening sky, where clouds were gathering on the western horizon. 2 miles in this terrain would take hours on foot, and that weather doesn't look promising. "The line shack seems our best option." Her practicality in crisis only increased Alexander's admiration. He unhitched the horses, secured what supplies they could carry, and helped Rose mount one of the animals while he led them north toward shelter. They reached the line shack as the first fat drops of rain began to fall, a simple one-room cabin with a stone fireplace, rough-hewn furniture, and provisions stored against winter. Alexander busied himself with the horses while Rose assessed their temporary home, By the time he joined her inside, she had a fire crackling in the hearth and was taking inventory of the supplies. "We won't starve," she announced. "There's coffee beans, flour, and jerky enough to feed a small army." Alexander smiled despite their predicament. Ranch hands have hearty appetites. As the storm intensified outside, they settled into a strange domesticity, brewing coffee, preparing a simple meal, talking as twilight deepened into night. The close quarters made their every movement an intimate dance of awareness. After dinner, they sat before the fire, the only sound the rain drumming on the roof and the occasional crack of burning wood. The single bed in the corner remained unmentioned, a problem for later. "Tell me about her," Rose said suddenly. "Lady Eleonora, what do you know of the woman you'll marry?" The question shouldn't have surprised him, yet it did. She's 23. Her family has an estate in Northumberland but little money to maintain it. Her father arranged the match through business associates. "That tells me about her circumstances, not her," Rose pressed gently. "What are her interests, her dreams? Will she be happy here, do you think?" Alexander realized with a jolt that he had never considered these questions. Lady Eleonora existed in his mind as an abstract concept, the titled bride who would bring respectability and connections, not as a woman with hopes and fears of her own. "I don't know," he admitted. "The arrangements were made through intermediaries. We've exchanged formal letters, nothing more." Rose's expression softened with something that might have been pity. "Oh, Alexander. You would bind your life to someone you don't know at all." "Many marriages begin that way," he defended. "Begin perhaps, but they needn't remain so." She leaned forward, firelight casting her face in gold and shadow. "What if she detests books, or cannot abide the isolation of ranch life? What if her values and dreams have no connection to yours?" Each question landed like a physical blow. Alexander had convinced himself that such considerations were secondary to the practical benefits of the match. Now, faced with Rose's compassionate interrogation, that conviction wavered. "And what of you?" He countered, needing to shift focus from his own doubts. "Will you find happiness teaching in a frontier town? Will it be enough?" "I don't know," she answered honestly, "but I'm willing to discover the answer." "That's the difference between us, Alexander. I acknowledge uncertainty while you pretend at certainty you don't possess." Her insight struck too close to home. Alexander stood abruptly, moving to the window to watch rain lash the darkness. Rose allowed him his retreat, patient in a way few people had ever been with him. When he finally turned back, the words he'd held inside for days spilled out. "Since you arrived, everything I believed about my life, my choices, feels insufficient, and I don't know what to do with that." Rose rose and crossed to him, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her presence. "You could begin by admitting what you truly want." "And if what I want is impossible?" "Is it," she asked softly, "or merely difficult?" The question hung between them, charged with all they hadn't said. Alexander found himself drawn to her by a force stronger than gravity, stronger than reason. When his hand lifted to touch her cheek, she didn't pull away. "This is madness," he whispered, even as he leaned closer. "Perhaps," she agreed, her breath warm against his lips. "Or perhaps it's the first sane choice either of us has made in a very long time." Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a question rather than a declaration. The second answered with certainty, deepening into something that swept away doubt and reservation. Alexander felt as though a locked room within him had suddenly been thrown open, flooding with light and air. When they finally parted, breathless, the world had irrevocably changed. Whatever happened next, there would be no returning to the careful isolation he had maintained for years. "What now?" Rose asked, still within the circle of his arms. It was the question that would define their future, and Alexander had no ready answer. Dawn broke with startling clarity after the storm, sunlight streaming through the cabin's single window. Alexander woke to find Rose already dressed and tending the fire, her hair neatly braided, her expression composed but uncertain. The night had changed everything and nothing. After their kiss, they had talked for hours, about their pasts, their fears, their hesitations. They had shared the narrow bed with a blanket between them, a fragile compromise between desire and propriety that left both restless through the night. "Good morning," he offered, watching her carefully. "Good morning," she returned with a small smile that didn't reach her eyes. "The weather has cleared. We should be able to reach Willow Creek today." The practical statement told Alexander everything he needed to know about her state of mind. Rose was retreating behind caution, giving him space to reconsider in the harsh light of day. As they shared a simple breakfast, the weight of unspoken words hung between them. Finally, Alexander broke the silence. "About last night." "You don't need to explain," Rose interrupted gently. "We were stranded, emotions were high. It was a moment of weakness that needn't change your plans." Her generous offering of escape both touched and troubled him. "Is that what you think it was, weakness?" Rose met his gaze directly. "I think it was truth, but truth doesn't always translate to action, especially when obligations and promises stand in its way." "And what if I want it to?" The question emerged before he could censor it. Hope flickered across her features before caution reasserted itself. "Then you have difficult decisions to make, Alexander. Decisions I cannot make for you, nor influence unduly." Her integrity only deepened his confusion. Most women in her position might have pressed their advantage, encouraged him to break his engagement. Instead, Rose stepped back, allowing him the dignity of his own choice. They left the line shack soon after, Alexander riding while Rose sat before him in the saddle, her back straight, a careful distance maintained despite their physical proximity. The journey to Willow Creek passed mostly in silence, each lost in private thoughts about possibilities and responsibilities. Willow Creek proved to be a town in determined transition from frontier outpost to respectable settlement. False-fronted buildings lined a wide main street, and construction was evident at several locations. The schoolhouse stood on the edge of town, a modest but sturdy building with an attached living quarters. "Home," Rose said with forced brightness as they dismounted before it. The town's welcome committee arrived almost immediately. The mayor, the general store owner and his wife, several prominent citizens curious about the new schoolteacher. Alexander noted their thinly veiled interest in finding him and Rose together, the quick assessments and exchange of glances. "Mr. Lockhart was kind enough to escort me after the stagecoach met with bandits," Rose explained smoothly. "Unfortunately, we encountered wagon troubles on the journey." Her calm poise impressed Alexander. She neither apologized for their delayed arrival nor offered unnecessary details that might fuel speculation. The mayor, a portly man named Thompson, pumped Alexander's hand enthusiastically. "Mighty fine of you, Lockhart. We're indebted for delivering our teacher safely." Big plans for education here, cornerstone of civilization, after all. As the welcoming committee whisked Rose away to show her the school and introduce her to what seemed like every resident of Willow Creek, Alexander found himself suddenly, acutely aware of her absence at his side. The sensation of loss felt disproportionate to their brief acquaintance. He wandered the town while waiting for the blacksmith to locate wagon parts, noting the bustling activity that spoke of growth and opportunity. The railroad spur under construction at the edge of town promised to transform Willow Creek from isolated community to connected hub. At the general store, Alexander overheard two women discussing the new schoolteacher. Seems educated enough but traveling alone, and arriving with Lockhart after being missing overnight. "Makes you wonder. Beggars can't be choosers when it comes to teachers out here. Besides, she'll have her hands full with 30 children and no assistant." Their casual judgment stirred unexpected anger in Alexander. They knew nothing of Rose's character, her intelligence, or the circumstances that brought her west. Before he could intervene, another voice joined the conversation, elderly, but sharp with authority. "I'd thank you both to remember that gossip is the devil's work," the older woman said firmly. "Miss McBride comes highly recommended from Philadelphia, and if Alexander Lockhart escorted her to town, we can be certain she was treated with perfect propriety." The rebuke, delivered with absolute conviction, surprised Alexander. The speaker caught his eye across the store and gave him a knowing nod, as if to say his presence had been noted all along. By late afternoon, the wagon was repaired, and Alexander faced the moment he'd been avoiding, saying goodbye to Rose. He found her at the schoolhouse, arranging books on shelves and setting up the classroom for the term ahead. "It's smaller than your library," she said when she noticed him in the doorway, "but it will serve its purpose." Alexander moved through the room, noting the careful organization, the hand-lettered alphabet above the blackboard, the globe positioned prominently on her desk. "They're fortunate to have you," he said honestly. "These children will receive an education few frontier schools could provide." Rose set down the book she was holding and faced him fully. "Is this goodbye, then?" The directness of her question left no room for polite evasion. Alexander felt the weight of all they'd shared and all that remained unsaid. For now, he answered carefully, I have responsibilities to attend to at the ranch. Lady Eleanor arrives in 18 days, Rose noted, her tone neutral despite the significance of the date. Yes. The single word hung between them, laden with implications neither was prepared to address directly. I meant what I said about writing, Alexander continued. I would like to know how you fare here. And I would welcome your letters, she replied softly. The distance between them, a mere few feet of classroom floor, felt suddenly vast and unbridgeable. Protocol and propriety dictated a formal handshake, perhaps a tip of his hat. Instead, Alexander closed the gap between them and took her hands in his. Rose, She silenced him with a gentle squeeze of his hands. Not now, Alexander. Whatever you wish to say, be certain of it first. I'll still be here after you've welcomed your fiancé and fulfilled your obligations. Her generosity in giving him time and space to make his decision with a clear conscience only confirmed what he already knew, that Rose McBride understood him better after a week than most people had in a lifetime. Until we meet again, he said finally, raising her hand to his lips in a gesture that balanced between propriety and intimacy. Until then, she agreed, her eyes bright with emotion she carefully controlled. Alexander left Willow Creek as sunset painted the mountains gold, the road back to his ranch stretching before him like the unknown future. For the first time in years, he rode without certainty about what awaited him. The Lockhart ranch hummed with activity in preparation for Lady Eleanor's arrival. Rooms long closed were aired and furnished, the best china unpacked, extra hands hired to ensure the property presented its most impressive face. Alexander moved through these preparations like a man sleepwalking, present in body but absent in spirit. His thoughts remained in Willow Creek with Rose, replaying their conversations, remembering the intelligence in her eyes and the challenge in her questions. He had written to her twice since their parting, careful letters that spoke of ranch operations and whether, of books he was reading and his father's history in the territory. Her replies came promptly, equally measured in their content, describing her students and the community's response to her teaching methods. Neither mentioned the kiss shared in the line shack nor the questions that hung unanswered between them. 3 days before Lady Eleanor's scheduled arrival, Alexander found himself in his father's study, reviewing the financial agreements that underpinned his engagement. The marriage would bring essential capital for expanding ranch operations and railroad investments, while providing Lady Eleanor's family with funds to maintain their ancestral estate. Everything made perfect sense on paper. The arrangements were practical, beneficial to both parties, exactly the kind of strategic alliance his father would have approved. Yet Alexander could no longer ignore the hollow feeling that accompanied these rational calculations. Rose's questions echoed in his mind. What of Lady Eleanor's dreams? Would she find happiness in Montana? Could two strangers build a life together based on mutual advantage rather than understanding or affection? More troubling still were the questions about his own desires. What did Alexander Lockhart truly want beyond fulfilling expectations and obligations? A knock at the study door interrupted his brooding. Jenkins entered, looking uncomfortable. Telegram just arrived from Helena, sir. Thought you'd want to see it right away. Alexander took the paper, expecting another update on Lady Eleanor's travel arrangements. Instead, the message froze his blood. Bandits who attacked Stagecoach identified. Escaped convicts from Wyoming territory, now targeting Willow Creek area. Teacher MCBRIDE possibly AT risk AS witness. Advise caution. Sheriff HAYES. Get my horse ready, Alexander ordered, already reaching for his gun belt. And send 2 men to follow with supplies. I'm riding for Willow Creek immediately. Jenkins didn't question the command, simply nodded and departed to carry out the instructions. Within 15 minutes, Alexander was galloping down the valley, pushing his horse harder than prudence advised, fear driving him forward. The journey to Willow Creek had never seemed longer. Every mile increased his anxiety, imagination conjuring scenarios of Rose in danger, Rose hurt, Rose facing those criminals alone. The rational part of him knew the telegram was merely a precaution, that the sheriff would have the situation in hand, but rationality held no sway over the terror that gripped his heart. By the time he reached Willow Creek, twilight was settling over the town. Alexander rode directly to the schoolhouse, dismounting before his horse had fully stopped. The building stood dark and silent, no lamp burning in the windows. Heart pounding, he pounded on the door. "Rose, Rose, are you there?" No answer came. Alexander circled the building, finding a back door unlocked. He drew his revolver and entered cautiously, calling her name again. The living quarters attached to the schoolroom showed signs of recent occupancy, a book open on the table, a half-finished cup of tea now cold, but no indication of struggle or violence. Alexander's fear ratcheted higher. Where was she? He rushed back outside and headed toward the center of town, where lights still burned in several establishments. At the general store, he found a group of townspeople gathered in anxious discussion. "Lockhart," Mayor Thompson exclaimed upon seeing him. "You've heard the news, then?" "About the bandits, yes. Where is Miss McBride?" "That's what we're trying to determine," the older woman Alexander recognized from his previous visit answered. "She didn't return from her daily walk by the creek. With those criminals reported in the area, we've organized search parties." "How long has she been missing?" Alexander demanded. 3 hours now," the mayor replied. "Sheriff's got men searching the North Trail. We're covering the town and south approaches." Without waiting for further information, Alexander returned to his horse. "I'll take the creek path east of town. It follows the rail line construction." He rode out of town at a gallop, terror and determination warring within him. The thought that he might lose Rose before he had even properly discovered what they could mean to each other was unbearable. Every moment of their brief acquaintance flashed through his mind, her challenge to his assumptions, her quiet strength, the way she saw past his defenses to the man he could become. The realization struck him with sudden clarity. He loved her, not with the cautious assessment of advantage and compatibility he'd applied to his engagement, but with the bone-deep recognition of having found his other half. The understanding came too late. As he followed the creek eastward, darkness made tracking nearly impossible. Alexander called Rose's name repeatedly, the sound echoing back mockingly from the hills. After an hour of fruitless searching, he spotted something white caught on a branch near the water's edge. Dismounting, he discovered it was a woman's handkerchief, the delicate embroidered RM in the corner confirming it belonged to Rose. Hard in his throat, Alexander followed the creek bank more carefully, scanning for any sign of passage. The moonlight revealed scuff marks in the mud, indicating someone, or several people, had recently traveled this way. Another half-mile brought him to the railroad construction site, where equipment and supplies stood abandoned for the night. A faint light flickered from the foreman's cabin set back from the tracks. Alexander approached cautiously, tethering his horse at a distance. As he crept closer, voices became audible through the cabin's thin walls. "Keep quiet and you won't get hurt," a male voice growled. "Once we get across the territorial line, you can go free." "People are already searching for me," Rose's voice replied, steady despite the circumstances. "You won't escape." The sound of her voice, alive and defiant, sent relief coursing through Alexander, quickly followed by cold determination. She was alive but clearly in danger. Through a gap in the curtains, he could make out 3 figures, the bandits from the stagecoach robbery, and Rose, seated on a chair, her hands bound before her but her posture unyielding. Alexander assessed the situation quickly. 3 against 1 with Rose in the middle. Direct confrontation risked her safety. He needed a distraction. Moving silently to the equipment area, he located a barrel of kerosene used for the work lamps. With careful precision, he created a trail leading away from the cabin, then set fire to its end. The flames raced along the path he'd created, igniting a stack of lumber with a dramatic whoosh. Shouts of alarm came from inside the cabin as the bandits noticed the fire. 2 rushed outside to investigate, leaving 1 guard with Rose. Alexander waited until they were fully engaged with the blaze, then moved to the cabin's rear window. The remaining bandit stood with his back to the window, attention divided between his captive and his companions outside. Alexander broke the glass with the butt of his revolver and leveled the weapon directly at the man's head. "Release her now," he commanded, "or I'll put a bullet in your skull." The bandit whirled, reaching for his gun, but Alexander's steady aim and deadly expression made him reconsider. Slowly, he raised his hands. "Kick your weapon toward the door and move to the corner," Alexander ordered, climbing through the window. To Rose, he added, "Are you hurt?" "No," she answered, eyes bright with relief and something more. "They surprised me on my walk, recognized me from the stagecoach." Alexander kept his gun trained on the bandit while moving to untie Rose's bonds. Outside, shouts indicated the fire was being contained, and his presence might soon be discovered by the other criminals. "We need to move quickly," he murmured, helping her to her feet. The cabin door burst open as one of the remaining bandits returned. He took in the scene and reached for his weapon, but Rose acted with surprising swiftness, grabbing a nearby lantern and hurling it at him. The glass shattered, oil spilling across the floor and igniting instantly from the still burning wick. Flames leapt up, creating a barrier between them and the door. The bandit Alexander had been guarding took advantage of the confusion to lunge forward, tackling him to the ground. They struggled for control of the revolver as smoke began filling the cabin. "Rose, get out through the window," Alexander shouted, landing a solid blow to his opponent's jaw. Instead of fleeing, Rose grabbed a piece of firewood from beside the stove and brought it down with decisive force on the bandit's head. The man collapsed, unconscious. "I'm not leaving you," she said firmly, helping Alexander to his feet. Fire now blocked both the door and window, the cabin rapidly becoming an inferno. Alexander spotted a trapdoor in the corner, likely leading to a storage cellar. "There," he pointed, already dragging the unconscious bandit toward it. He wouldn't leave even a criminal to burn to death. They managed to get the trapdoor open and lower their prisoner down before descending themselves. The cellar was little more than an earthen pit with a few shelves of supplies, but it offered temporary refuge from the flames. There must be an outside entrance, Rose reasoned, searching the walls as smoke began seeping through the floorboards above. Alexander found it, a narrow door reinforced with timber, secured with a heavy bolt. He threw his weight against it twice, until it gave way, spilling them out into the cool night air. They dragged the unconscious bandit clear of the now fully engulfed cabin. In the distance, shouting indicated that the town's search party had spotted the fire and was approaching. For a moment, Alexander and Rose stood side by side, catching their breath, the reality of their narrow escape sinking in. Then Rose turned to him, question and wonder in her eyes. "How did you know I was in danger? Why are you here?" Alexander reached for her hands, holding them tightly, as if reassuring himself of her solidity. "I received word the bandits might target you as a witness, but even before that," he paused, searching for words equal to the truth in his heart. "Even before that, I was wrestling with the knowledge that I cannot marry Lady Eleonora." Rose's expression registered shock, then cautious hope. "Alexander." "Let me finish," he interrupted gently. "Tonight, when I thought I might lose you, everything became clear. The arrangements, the advantages, the practical considerations, none of it matters compared to what I feel for you." The firelight painted her features in gold and shadow as she absorbed his words. "And what is that, exactly?" "Love," he said simply, the word both terrifying and liberating. "I love you, Rose McBride, your intelligence, your courage, your willingness to challenge me. I love the way you see beyond what I show the world to who I might become." Tears shimmered in her eyes, but her practical nature asserted itself even in this emotional moment. "Your fiancé arrives in 3 days. There are contracts, agreements, expectations." "All of which can be addressed," Alexander insisted. "It will be difficult, perhaps even costly, but no financial consideration could possibly outweigh the lifetime of regret I'd face if I let you go." Rose studied his face, searching for certainty. "Are you sure?" "Truly sure." In answer, Alexander pulled her into his arms and kissed her with all the conviction in his heart. When they finally parted, breathless, the approaching search party's lanterns were visible on the path. "I'm sure," he promised. "Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." The following weeks brought upheaval and resolution in equal measure. Alexander sent telegrams to Lady Eleonora's party in Helena, requesting an immediate meeting rather than proceeding with the planned reception at the ranch. The resulting conversation was difficult but necessary. Lady Eleonora proved to be a pragmatic young woman with secrets of her own, namely, an attachment to her family's steward, a match her father would never approve. She accepted Alexander's withdrawal from their arrangement with surprising grace, especially when he offered a generous settlement to ease her family's financial strain without the obligation of marriage. "I admit I was dreading our union," she confessed over tea in Helena's grandest hotel. Montana seemed a savage exile from everything familiar. "And now," Alexander inquired, a smile transformed her rather austere features. "Now I shall return to England with funds sufficient to restore a portion of our estate. perhaps enough leverage to persuade father that Thomas's common birth is less important than his uncommon character. Business partners and investors were less easily managed. The dissolution of the engagement meant restructuring several financial arrangements, selling parcels of land Alexander had intended to develop, and postponing the expansion he'd planned. Jenkins and the ranch hands adjusted to these changes with minimal grumbling, many of them having witnessed the transformation in their employer since Rose entered his life. Through it all, Rose remained in Willow Creek, continuing her teaching duties while Alexander sorted through the consequences of his decision. They exchanged letters daily, each one deepening their understanding of one another. 2 months after the incident at the railroad camp, Alexander rode into Willow Creek on a crisp autumn afternoon. The schoolhouse bell was just ringing to dismiss students as he arrived, and he watched from horseback as children spilled out the door, calling goodbyes to their teacher. Rose appeared in the doorway, her golden hair catching the sunlight. She spotted him immediately, a smile blooming across her features that made his heart race even now. "Mr. Lockhart," she greeted him formally as he approached, mindful of the few remaining students. "What brings you to our humble town today?" "I have business with the schoolteacher," he replied, removing his hat. "A matter of some importance." Her eyes sparkled with suppressed amusement. "Indeed, and what might that be?" Alexander waited until the last child had disappeared around the corner before taking her hands in his. "I've come to ask if she might consider a change of employment. The Lockhart Ranch is in desperate need of someone to organize its library and perhaps teach any future occupants their letters." "Future occupants," Rose repeated, color rising in her cheeks. "That sounds like a long-term position." "The most permanent I could devise," he confirmed, reaching into his pocket to withdraw a small velvet box. "One that comes with certain conditions, however." Rose's breath caught as he opened the box to reveal his mother's ring, a simple gold band set with a single perfect diamond. "Alexander." "I love you, Rose McBride," he said, dropping to one knee despite the dusty street. "These past months have shown me what truly matters in building a life, not advantage or alliance but partnership and understanding. Will you marry me?" Tears spilled onto her cheeks as she nodded. "Yes. With all my heart, yes." Alexander slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to kiss her, heedless of who might see or what gossip might follow. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "There are practical considerations, of course. The school term, your responsibilities here." Rose laughed, the sound joyful and free. "Now you speak of practicalities. Where is the impulsive man who broke an engagement and restructured his business empire for love?" "Still here," he assured her, but hoping his future wife might help him find balance between heart and head. "Always," she promised, reaching up to touch his face. "Though I would like to complete the school year. These children deserve consistency." "Then I shall court you properly through winter," Alexander agreed, "and will marry in spring when the valley blooms again." As they walked hand in hand through Willow Creek, planning their future, Alexander reflected on the journey that had brought them together. The man who once believed love was a luxury ill-suited to frontier life had discovered that love was, in fact, the very foundation that made such a life worth building. The wedding of Alexander Lockhart and Rose McBride took place on a perfect May morning in 1884, with the mountains still capped in snow, but the valley lush with new grass and wildflowers. The ceremony was held on the ranch, with guests from both Willow Creek and neighboring properties in attendance. Rose wore a gown of ivory silk, modest yet elegant, with her golden hair crowned by a circlet of blue forget-me-nots. Alexander, waiting for her on the veranda where they had first truly spoken, thought she outshone the sunrise breaking over the eastern ridge. Their vows were simple but heartfelt, promises to support each other's dreams, to build their legacy together, to find in each other the home neither had truly known before. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that rose from the assembled guests seemed to echo across the valley. The celebration continued throughout the day and into evening, with tables set up beneath flowering apple trees and lanterns strung from branches. As twilight softened the landscape, Alexander led his bride away from the festivities to a quiet spot overlooking the ranch. "Happy?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Rose leaned into his embrace, completely. "Though I'm still adjusting to the idea of being mistress of all this." It's ours now to shape as we choose, he reminded her. Already you've brought changes I never imagined. This was true. In the months of their engagement, Rose had established a small school for the children of ranch hands, begun cataloging the extensive library, and suggested improvements to worker housing that increased loyalty and productivity. Her practical intelligence complemented Alexander's vision, creating a partnership that strengthened both. I have something to show you, he said, taking her hand and leading her toward a grove of cottonwoods beyond the main house. There, nestled among the trees, stood a new structure, a small, perfect cabin built of dressed stone and timber. Alexander, what is this? Rose asked, puzzled. He opened the door, revealing an interior that combined comfort with simplicity, a stone fireplace, comfortable furniture, and bookshelves already lined with volumes. Our retreat, he explained. A place that belongs just to us, not to the Lockhart legacy or ranch business. Somewhere we can always find each other, even when responsibilities pull us in different directions. Rose turned to him, eyes shining with emotion. It's perfect, our own line shack, but considerably more comfortable. I thought we might spend our wedding night here, Alexander suggested, under the stars rather than under the weight of family history. Her smile was answer enough. Later, as they lay together in the quiet intimacy of their new sanctuary, Rose propped herself on one elbow to study her husband's face in the firelight. Do you remember what you told me when we first met? That the frontier is no place for love, that practical partnerships endure where passion fades. Alexander smiled at the memory of his former convictions. I was a fool. No, she corrected gently, just someone who hadn't yet discovered that love isn't a luxury. It's the essential foundation that makes all other endeavors meaningful. As he pulled her close, Alexander reflected on how completely his understanding of success had transformed. The ranch still prospered, his business interests continued to expand, but these achievements now served a greater purpose, creating a future with the woman who had challenged him to want more than mere survival. I love you, Rose Lockhart, he whispered against her hair. And I love you, she returned, her voice carrying the certainty of a promise kept and a journey just beginning. Outside their sanctuary, the Montana night spread vast and star-filled above the ranch that would become their legacy, not merely as a business empire, but as the foundation for a family shaped by the love they had found against all expectations on the American frontier. In the years that followed, Alexander often thought of how close he had come to missing this essential truth, that the real wealth of the West lay not in land or cattle or business arrangements, but in finding the courage to build a life with someone who saw you clearly and loved you completely. It was a lesson worth all the gold in Montana territory, and one he would never forget.